Every railway enthusiast knows that hills and gradients are the Achilles heel of the average railway engine. You can have all the power in the world, but at the end of the day, the engines still have to obey the laws of traction. This meant that to get the best out of the engines, the tracks had to be as flat as possible. Bridges, tunnels and viaducts would solve this problem, but for the Midland Railway, they had to build a viaduct so long, its span stretched nearly a mile. Bridges and viaducts are very similar in their structure and what they do. Viaducts, however, are made from a series of bridges and are ideal for spanning large gorges or valleys that a single bridge simply couldn't support. The Welland Valley was one such valley. At the centre of the valley sits the river Welland. The river is of modest size and surrounded by floodplains. While the land couldn't really support large settlements, the land's owner, Colonel Tyrone, was only too happy for the land to be used for the railway when he was approached by the Midland Railway Company. The railway wanted to build a 15-mile track from Kettering to Manton. The line would connect to London directly via Haringworth Station. It proposed one of the largest and ambitious projects the world had ever seen at the time, an 82-arch, 1.6-kilometre viaduct costing £12,000 that would take the train from one edge of the valley to the other. It was concluded that each pillar would have to be at least 6 foot thick, with the exception of 10 that had to be double the width, that were carefully spaced throughout the structure to provide extra support to the weight above it. The arches each spanned 40 foot across and are on average 57 foot high. The contractors Lucas and Aird and architect William Henry Barlow concluded that a lot of men would be required for this great project, and soon word got out to labourers and navvies all around the country. In 1876, the first of 20 million bricks were laid. The bricks were made using local clay, mined from the surrounding area and fired on site. Workers would work day and night making the bricks, and teams would fill up to 14 wagons a day to take them to the waiting bricklayers. Depending on the job, the average worker would receive around £2 a week for their work, with some being offered extra pay for working night shifts. The navvies, as I discussed in an earlier video, were people considered the lower end of society, but were gifted workers. They and their families flocked to the railway, desperate for work. In 1875, a camp of 47 was created to house them. Each hut would house around 12 people, but many took on lodgers. A second camp was open at Gretton Hill to accommodate any new worker looking for work. Officially, there was 400 men employed to work on the viaduct, but over 2,500 men were stationed along the 15 miles of track cast over 40 camps. The local villages and traders took advantage of the influx of workers by selling beer and wares. The work was back-breaking and cruel. Each man who worked on the viaduct was expected to move at least 20 tons of soil per shift for the massive foundations. The concrete was mixed with lime, which would burn and irritate the skin. The powder could be inhaled as it mixed, causing shortness in breath, and many men would go blind as their eyes quite literally clouded over. Local surgeon F.W. Brown was appointed surgeon and doctor, overseeing the viaduct and the building of 2 major tunnels. He noted several accidents he had to attend, and his accounts gave insight into the danger of working on the railway. He attended many accidents, some involving boys as young as 13 years old, with many dying from their injuries. Despite the dreadful working conditions and the low pay, the work continued. 2 years after the work started, on the 5th of July 1878, the very last keystone on the very last arch was laid by Colonel Tyrone in a great ceremony. It remains to this day the largest masonry viaduct in the UK. The railway was completed, and on the 1st of March 1880, the viaduct took its very first passengers. The line would carry a dozen expresses a day, ferrying commuters from Nottingham to the nation's heart. The viaduct suffered its first real test during World War I. During the war, the railway and the viaduct was used to transport troops. The German knew the importance of the railway and committed to destroying the UK infrastructure. The largest viaduct in the UK would be a perfect target. The viaduct was attacked and it was buckled, but it never broke. In 1939, the viaduct was forced to be placed under armed guard after threats from the IRA came to light, threatening to bomb it. The viaduct continued to be used daily, but over time roads would replace the rails, and the viaduct became a prime target for the beeching axe. In 1967, the last passenger service crossed the bridge. However, unlike many of the unlucky railways, the line was allowed to stay open as a freight line. It remained that way for over 30 years. During the time, the bricklayer's work was finally beginning to weather. To replace the bricks that were deteriorating, a new type of brick was used. It was fired for longer and gave the bricks more strength and more water repellence. During the refurbishment, local workers could see children's handprints embedded in the brickwork. It could easily be imagined little children playing amongst the clay moulds before the bricks were hand-fired in the kiln. It brought home the human aspect and the families of the people that worked to build the viaduct. In 2001, Network Rail used both modern and traditional techniques to strengthen the viaduct at a cost of £1.4 million. 2009, the viaduct was opened to passengers once again, and in 2017, the viaduct underwent a long-term strengthening programme which enabled the viaduct to receive the highest restrictive load capacity available, increasing trains in number, speed and weight. Today, the viaduct is used for a multitude of uses, just like the railway intended. It takes passengers and is very popular amongst railway enthusiasts and heritage charter trains. You can't really get a measure of its size unless you see it in person. The viaduct is a Grade 2 listed building, and I would recommend visiting both the railway and the valley. It's a beautiful area and a photographer's dream. Just remember your wide-angle lens.